Welcome, language learners, to Language Learning Wellness, the mindful podcast for all language learners who are looking for encouragement and more confidence along their journey. Now, if you are interested in working with me more closely after this episode, be sure to go to the description below to check out my Patreon community where you can network with other like-minded language learners, as well as my coaching membership, the Mindful Multilinguals Collective, if you want to 5 times your language confidence results this year. Let's get to the episode. So I am filming this episode right about at 5 a.m. my time. And the reason is because a strike of inspiration hit me. You guys know that I can't do a podcast episode unless it's pretty spontaneous. And this is one of those times because I just came back from the Polyglot Gathering in Prague from 2024. And I'm here to share with you my recent reflections as I break down a lot of what this experience has meant for me in my languages. Let you in behind the scenes of how my particular experience went. As an introvert, as someone who has struggled a lot with self-criticism in their language learning, faced a lot of self-comparison with other learners. And you know that with the Polyglot Gathering, you do wear those badges and letting other people know about your levels, how many you speak, etc. So I went anyways. And what I'm really going to walk you through here is, where I stayed, what really made me want to go to the gathering in the first place. And then also what happened right before I went to the gathering, how I was feeling, also during what happened at the gathering, and then afterwards, my final reflections. I think as language learners, it is so important after having such an impactful experience that involves your languages, right? Whether that be the Polyglot Gathering or speaking with someone that really meant a lot to you, right? Or visiting a country for the first time, it is so essential for us to really step back instead of just checking it off our checklist as, oh yeah, I did that, great, now on to the next goal, right? I love to take a mindful approach with languages, so I'm doing that exactly now, really taking time to reflect and break down what this experience has meant to me, right? Because as we go through our language learning journey, this active reflection is really going to help us with our creating meaning, right, in our lives and in our language learning lives especially. So what really inspired me to go in the first place? Well, I was always very taken aback and not really wanting to go for a lot of years. Also, it just wasn't possible for me to go either. Whenever I thought about going to the Polyglot Gathering, and of course I follow Richard Simcott and as well as, some of the other organizers on Instagram. And so I thought, I guess I am ready for this. Better not ready than feeling not ready and also telling yourself that you'll never be ready, if that makes sense. I didn't feel necessarily that I was ready, but I felt some sort of pull towards it this year that really felt like it aligned with me and also with my curiosity, and also knowing, I've developed so many of these really effective coping mechanisms for being more mindful in my languages, for not being beating myself up every time I make a mistake or think about, how could I have said this in a more advanced way? I just suck at this language learning today. With all of those really self-critical thoughts that we do break down with ongoing support inside the Mindful Multilinguals Collective, by the way. So make sure to check that out in the podcast description if you are interested in when I'm opening doors next for that, because we do take a lot more mindful approach to learning your languages in order to feel confident and have confidence that lasts. But what I was referencing before is, there will never be a point where I am totally ready. And even as an introvert and knowing that this is a really social gathering, I believe the Polyglot Conference that is held more at the end of the year each year is more academic, but this is definitely, more social and talking with others. But I thought, it's only for 4 or 5 days. I can handle that. So I booked an accommodation and it turned out to actually be 50 minutes away from where the gathering was held at the University of Prague, Business and Economics, I believe. So that wasn't great. I could have done better research on that, but it was a really nice place and really relaxing as well, away from the city. And when I thought, after probably about 12 hours of traveling, I remember making a video even before I left off in an airplane. You guys can actually check out that video. It's called How I Study Languages, and I'm going to put it in the description. But that actually goes through my whole plan of how I prepared my languages and refreshed all of them and maintained all of them to a point where I felt comfortable enough switching from them or just spontaneously talking with other people. So definitely check that out in the description. But needless to say, I did make a pretty extravagant plan about 2 months before going to the gathering. So I made sure that I did everything that I could to think about, how do I want to present my languages at this gathering? And yes, this included aspects of my perfectionism, right? Because I don't think perfectionism is actually bad. I think it really helped me in this case because it really got me to take action. I don't always recommend taking action as the only suitable decision that we make in our languages. Sometimes it's better to not take any action at all. But because I was taking action and I felt aligned with this possibility in my life for going to the gathering for the very first time, I was like, I'm going to go all in with this plan. And of course, what I actually ended up doing, how everything came to fruition in comparison to what I actually set out to do for myself, and for setting out my languages, as I described in that video, it looked kind of different, and it was definitely I don't want to say watered down, but it was definitely a less intense version than I made it seem in that video, because there are definitely things that I did not get to that I planned to do, but it was totally okay. We're being flexible here. Such an important aspect of language learning, for being flexible, that is totally underrated, but it's going to save a lot of what we go through as language learners, and save us a lot as well of comparing ourselves and criticism to, and just making for a more joyful language journey. So I did as much as I could do from that video. I embarked on that plane ride. I got there the very first day, and believe me, I was very, very scared. I did not really think that the gathering felt super real, that I was even going to the gathering in the first place, until, of course, I was in the country. I don't know if you guys have felt like that before, but it was definitely nerve-wracking. Definitely nerve-wracking to go there technically alone with no one else who was participating in the gathering. Now, my boyfriend did accompany me to the registration desk because I was very, very nervous. And we had actually tried to go in the back of the university because there really were no clear signs about how to actually get to the registration desk. And it was really funny because we actually met Language Simp. If you follow me a lot on my YouTube channel, we did a wonderful interview about taking care of our mental health in language learning. Definitely a little bit off of what he usually presents himself as online, as more of the Giga Chad hyper polyglot, right? But we had a wonderful conversation, and he had already told me he was going to the gathering, so I was already expecting to see him there. But we did run into each other when I was getting lost with how to actually get to the registration desk. It was really cool to meet him, and we went over more to the back of the university and started talking a little bit of Russian after I had registered. And even in that moment, I felt myself stuttering, right? Because this was, I guess I was expecting to speak probably maybe like Spanish or maybe Italian, maybe French, some of my more advanced languages from the start. I wasn't expecting everyone to just pop out in Russian all of a sudden, which is one of my languages that I'm not as comfortable in, but I can get by in it. And I made some stuttering mistakes, I made some pauses in what I was saying, but that interaction really only lasted about a minute, right? That I was speaking to Language Sip in Russian, and then there were also 2 native speakers right beside us in that group that we had just casually formed. There's a lot of group forming and getting to know people at the gathering that's very spontaneous, which I really liked. But that was my first experience. And I was like, you know what? That is all good. I managed to spontaneously connect with someone else in Russian. And also with Language Sim. So that was pretty cool. And so after that, we had gone to the opening ceremony, which was not anything new. I had already done a lot of research about what was going to happen at the gathering. And so actually seeing people in person, the organizers, that was probably the most fun instead of listening to the information that they were giving us. We then headed over to the beer garden that was really close to the university. That was awesome. That was probably one of my favorite nights actually my only favorite night, because I really spent only one night at the gathering. The rest I decided to just go in the morning. But it was so much fun, and I got to meet Kuba there, who is one of my members for the Mindful Multilinguals Collective, and also favors a more mindful approach to learning languages and maintaining them with personal life. Absolutely amazing to meet him and also speak in another language with him, as well as some others that we had met. We spoke a little bit in Spanish with all three of us in the group that we had formed with Kuba, and we had spoken Italian as Kuba and me had headed home. So that was just wonderful to be able to just be so spontaneous with a group of people that were just as curious, just as excited to be there, right? Because language learning and having such an intense focus on your language or languages is definitely not seen usually, according to a lot of other language learners that I know. And also according to me, we don't find a lot of shared interest in what we are doing with our languages. So it was just amazing to be part of that and contribute to it. And then probably over the next 3 or 4 days, I made the language conversation tables my focus. I wasn't as interested in the presentations, and I wasn't giving any presentation, but I really wanted to meet people and practice my languages. And as I had said in the How I Study Languages YouTube video in the description, I made Turkish, Russian, and Arabic my focus for really wanting to practice. If I practiced anything else, that would just be icing on the cake, but I really wanted to practice my intermediate languages because I was finally reaching a point where I had not experienced my head hurting switching between the three. It's taken years, but I was really excited to just use them, right? Instead of worrying so much about, okay, did I get this grammatical point right in Russian? Did I get this pronunciation wrong in Arabic, right? And just using them, right? Being present. And that is exactly what the language conversation tables helped me do. It was also interesting because I did have this one interaction with another guy who spoke really well in all of his languages, but me and him probably talked for about 45 minutes up to an hour, and we were switching probably in between like 7 or 8 languages. I was like, I can't do anymore, and I was just floored. Like my energy was just gone after that. Those first few language conversation tables on the first official day of the gathering, which was technically the second day since we already had more of an evening opening ceremony on the first day. So I ended the second day like that. And of course, my boyfriend was with me, so we did a little bit of tourism after that, but not much because I was just winded. I know a lot of the people that I had met at the gathering too. I asked them what they usually did after the conference, and they were like, I just passed out on my hostel bed. I didn't want to talk to anyone else because my energy was just drained. I was like, me too, but in a very good way, in a way that I've never experienced before, right? Because I had never been in a place where I could use my languages like that. And so that was just a great day, as well as the first evening. And then probably third through fifth days at the conference, I did get to meet a lot of people that had either recognized me from my YouTube videos or maybe we followed each other on Instagram. Manuel was one of them from New York City. Shout out to you if you are listening to this podcast episode, as well as Constance from Germany. That was amazing. We had met each other on Instagram as well. And it was just amazing to be able to actually see and match a face to what everyone was always communicating through text, right? Through social media. And as well, I know that as an introvert, right? I told you that I plan to just show up for the gathering in the mornings, which is pretty much what I did. I actually didn't go to the closing ceremony on the last day just because, my energy was just shot after the because I attended again in the morning and I was practicing Arabic and some Russian. as well, and Turkish on the last day. So it was a pretty heavy language day for me. So I didn't feel the need to necessarily show up to everything, right? And just kind of make this my own sort of trip, especially with my introverted energy. I needed a lot of time to really recharge and not be around the touristy places, right? Because Prague is really, really overrun by tourists as well. And it was just a lot to even just be not talking maybe, but just being around so many people in some of the touristy places in the city. So that's really how I managed more of my introvert energy there. And it was manageable, even though I was pretty tired for all 4 days. And self-comparison really did not play into the picture because during the conference, there were so many, or I guess I should reference it as gathering, right? The gathering was so eye-opening, and how people responded to one another, how they were so welcoming, how they really actually waited for you if you were struggling to find a word, or maybe you would use, if you were trying to talk in Italian, but you were using Spanish words. I mean, they understand that to a T with knowing how to mix up languages. And you guys, even with my best languages, even with German and Italian, I was mixing them up sometimes with other languages in such an environment, because your brain is working like clockwork with switching in between. So, and also just listening to other languages around you as you try to communicate in the one that you're working on currently with that person in conversation. So it was just a lot. But self-comparison really did not come into play because I could just be present with how I was, how I showed up as a language learner. That's also something I talked about in the video. How did I want to show up, right? Because at the end of the day, right, people are going to remember you for your presence. It's not necessarily going to be just because of your skills, or maybe even any of your skills, right? I'll tell you, with some people that knew me online or we had followed each other on Instagram, what really mattered to me was just being able to connect with them in a different way, being able to ask them other things in another language. It wasn't to assess them or anything like that. It was just to simply be and enjoy. And we talk so much about, language learning strategies and staying motivated and everything. And I feel like this Polyglot Gathering has been my motivation for me attending next year and maintaining my languages through next year so I can have that experience again. It was really unlike any other thing. And in such a non-judgmental environment. Again, as I said, if you were struggling with a word, people would wait for you. They would not switch to English on you. They might switch to another language, asking you if it was like that, right? But it was very welcoming, and you could always ask multiple times, I didn't understand that. And there was a lot more English in general that was used, more than I expected. I guess my initial expectation was to not use English outside of the presentations. Like, you always had to use another language. And I don't know where I got that rule, but I had formed it in my head. But it was great to actually speak in English for a little bit sometimes with some of the participants, because my brain was just so tired after speaking in other languages or switching between different languages. And again, as I said, with mistakes, everyone was making mistakes. It didn't really matter, who was speaking what or what they weren't saying. And it's not anything that we focused on as a group, right? It was just communication and sharing our love of languages, right? And so it was easier, right, to be vulnerable when I said I didn't understand something, to be courageous in that way, approach people, right, that I didn't know, but I knew at least that they spoke a language that I was learning because I could see it on their badge. So as I sit here at like 5:30 now, it is my time after arriving back from the gathering. What is most important for me is the importance of presence in our language learning, and knowing that that can be found in different ways. Yes, what I was able to do, right, I had the privilege of doing in order to go to the gathering, that of course was effortless presence, right? Because right, you guys know when you are drawn to languages and it's like you're talking with a friend and you know that They aren't judging you. They actually really want to know what you're saying. You're connecting with people without concentrating as much on the language in some cases, right? The language becomes really just a tool, right? It's not you. It's just a tool, and it's what your brain is using as a tool of communication when you can really connect to the core of the other person and you can show up yourself authentically in your language, whatever that means for you. That's when the presence is really unlocked, when you find joy in what you are doing. And that's not always super easy, right, to replicate at home. Sometimes it might even be impossible or feel impossible to replicate it in the exact same way that you succeeded in doing whatever brought you joy, right, during that really impactful language learning experience, whether that be at the Polyglot Gathering or on a trip or studying abroad in a country, or really just even having a small conversation or being able to read a text, right, in another language script that you're studying for the first time. But there is always a way. And I think what I'm going to take away from this is knowing that, I personally, for me, it's always been frustrating whenever I started developing my love of languages, but I knew that I was in a city in the United States where, first of all, no one pretty much cared about languages. Maybe they used Spanish, but it was a need, not a want, not just necessarily, which is fine for their lives. But it always felt really isolating, again, as I had mentioned in previous, somewhat earlier in this episode. And so I thought about, it's okay, though, that I am having to use English, right? That I'm having to use my native language to communicate with the people I love. Again, it is really concentrating on that aspect of being present, right? That's what people are really going to remember you for at the end of the day, and really at the end of our lives, if we're thinking a little bit existentially. But we know we always sometimes think about those kinds of things from time to time, especially as we get older and reflect, which is fine. And what I know I'm going to do, I'm going to continue probably not adding any other language, right? For me, I really want to be present in the languages that I am with now. And I've decided for myself that if I add on another language, I've already dabbled in a few, which I might or might not continue, but really being present in Arabic, Turkish, and Russian, because I really noticed how I enjoyed practicing them the most, right? And this is why a reflection process is so critical after such an experience, right? Because you can really take and marinate, I like to say, on what new information about yourself that you gathered, right? Because you're always going to be changing and evolving as a language learner, and I am no exception. So that's really what I want to concentrate on, is those three. They're all kind of at the same level, but I really want to dive deeper. And, also speak them at the gathering too, but just dive deeper with those languages, be present in my textbooks, not getting caught up on, why am I still on this chapter? If I had studied every day, then I could have reached this next chapter, right? So that's really what I'm going to take away from this. Also knowing that this place that I'm living in the United States, is really not for me. And I can't do anything about that right now, right? I'm not going to move away. In fact, I have a lease on an apartment until 1 year into the future. And so that's not going to be possible, unfortunately. But also, as I reflect on that, I think it's a really good exercise on acceptance and meeting yourself where you are, right? Because we can't always think about, okay, how can I specifically replicate what I was feeling, and also after a reflection, when I do understand, okay, maybe what is best for me, maybe this location that I'm living in is not best for me. But again, not everyone can just pack up and move, right? After they have a really nice experience. And so, the art of acceptance, which I really work on with my members inside the Mindful Multilingualist Collective, that is just as much as flexibility, a very underrated way to learn a language and keep on learning languages. So I'm going to do with what I have, meeting myself where I am, studying a little bit as I can. I know this summer is going to be really, really busy with what I'm doing with the Mindful Multilinguals Collective. We'd love for you to join as well if you're interested in the description below, but it's going to be a lot. I know it's going to be, and I know that the same intensity and the same joy, the exact same way that I express that joy and intensity during the gathering is not going to be able to be replicated exactly and to the same level of intensity during the summer, at least. I don't know about after summer, but I know for the summer, looking at my life obligations, that's what we have to work with. But I'm always going to remember it as something that I can congratulate myself on, right? This is something that I maybe even 5 years ago would have not imagined myself doing without tumbling into a lot of negative self-talk, a lot of self-criticism, a lot of getting too much into our heads so that then our brains can't think logically, right? Once we are so wrapped up in with our emotions, our prefrontal cortex shuts down, and it's really hard to find any sort of alternative solution. So I congratulate myself on that. And I see the self-trust, right? I see the trust in myself going to something for the first time, right? Doing a lot of things for the first time with my languages. That is something that I will never forget. The people I'll be excited to see again. And really, again, what it all comes down to is knowing more about yourself, right? Learning more about yourself in the changing season of life that you are in. If you cannot go to the Polyglot Gathering this year, then definitely I advise that you do go if you do feel that it's aligned for you. I know that a lot of introverts, people who consider themselves shy, are kind of turned off by the idea, and they're not sure that that's the environment for them. So to each their own. You guys know yourself best. And I am definitely going to show up next year. But until then, I think I have a lot of good feelings to marinate on, to work with. My reflections about this are not over. They never are. Probably at the next Polyglot Gathering that I'm going to, I'll be able to reflect even more on the very first time that I went. And if you have been to the Polyglot Gathering, definitely let me know. You can always email me at emily@languagetravelaadoptee.com. I would love to hear your thoughts. And if we didn't see each other, hopefully we will see each other very, very soon at a next gathering. Thank you guys so much for listening to me. I'm going to shut this all down to hopefully go back to sleep, but I hope this was valuable, and we'll check in with each other in another episode. Thank you for tuning in. If you are interested in working with me more closely and also supporting the podcast, do check out the Patreon community that I have crafted just for you, as well as learn more about my group coaching membership, the Mindful Multilinguals Collective. If you did enjoy this podcast, make sure to give a like if you are watching on YouTube, or rate the podcast as well if you are listening on Spotify or other podcast platforms. This podcast spreads the best by word of mouth, so make sure to let all of your language learning friends, acquaintances, coworkers, language institutions know about it if you think it's helpful for them. Take care, language learners, and we'll talk soon.